Beneath the fractured moon, a single drop of blood traced the curve of a forgotten blade, whispering promises of wounds yet to mend. The wind howled through the jagged peaks of the Frostfang Mountains, carrying the scent of pine and regret as Elara stumbled through the snow-swept exile. Her bare feet, numb from the biting cold, sank into drifts that swallowed her ankles like the jaws of some ancient beast. She had been cast out at dawn, the pack's verdict echoing in her ears long after the alpha's snarl faded. Unworthy, unmarked, a shadow among wolves. No mate bond had claimed her. No heat had risen to prove her place. They called her barren earth, unfit for the fertile wilds of the clan. Now, the world was white and endless, a canvas of isolation painted by the indifferent moon. Elara clutched the frayed edge of her woolen shawl, the only remnant of her former life, its threads unraveling like the ties to her kin. In the center of it all hung her symbol, a silver pendant, etched with the crescent of the goddess, cool against her chest. It had been her mother's, passed down through generations of Omegas who whispered of hidden gifts, of touches that could soothe the savage heart. But Elara had never felt such power. It was a fool's trinket now, mocking her with its gleam in the pale light. The air tasted of iron and frost, each breath a shard in her lungs as she crested a ridge and beheld the valley below. A frozen river snaking through evergreens, bowed under ice, their branches clawing at the starless sky. She collapsed against a boulder, the stone's chill seeping through her thin shift, and let the tears freeze on her lashes. Why had the goddess forsaken her? The pack's fires had always warmed her from afar, but now they were a distant glow on the horizon, receding like a dream she could no longer grasp. Memories clawed at her. The alpha's mate, heavy with child, glaring from the circle of elders. The jeers of the betas as they stripped her of her rank, branding her an outcast. "Go to the wilds," they had said. "Let the snow claim what the moon rejects." Hunger gnawed at her belly, sharper than the wind's teeth. But it was the ache in her soul that threatened to undo her, the hollow echo where belonging should have been. As twilight bled into night, a low uivo pierced the gale, distant yet insistent, like the cry of a soul adrift. Elara lifted her head, her Omega senses stirring despite the despair. It was no ordinary wolf. There was a rhythm to it, a lament woven with command, as if the mountain itself mourned. She rose, legs trembling, and pressed onward, drawn by an invisible thread. The pendant warmed against her skin, a fleeting heat that puzzled her, like an ember in the heart of winter. Deeper into the ravine she ventured, where the snow thinned to reveal a cave mouth yawning black against the white. Steam rose faintly from cracks in the earth, a geothermal whisper defying the freeze. Elara hesitated, the wind whipping her dark hair across her face, but the weevo came again, closer now, laced with pain. She slipped inside, the darkness enveloping her like a shroud, the air thick with the musk of blood and fur. There, in the flickering glow of a dying fire, lay the warrior. He was immense, even in repose, a king among alphas. His broad frame sprawled across furs stained crimson. His armor, dented and scarred, bore the insignia of the iron-clad throne, a realm of endless wars beyond the peaks. Wounds marred him, gashes across his chest from claws or blades, seeping slowly, and a deeper gash along his thigh that spoke of betrayal's bite. His face, chiseled and shadowed by a week's growth of beard, twisted in the throes of unrest. Sweat beaded his brow despite the cold, and his breaths came ragged, haunted by whatever demons chased him in sleep. Elara froze, her heart pounding like thunder in her ears. An alpha like this, royal, unbroken in spirit, should command fear. Yet here he was, felled by his own frailty. The pendant pulsed hotter now, an insistent throb against her breastbone, urging her forward. She should flee. Omegas did not approach fallen kings without peril. But curiosity, that treacherous spark, rooted her. Who had brought him low? The scent of him filled the cave, smoke and steel mingled with the copper tang of blood, and beneath it, a vulnerability that mirrored her own exile. Kneeling beside him, she extended a tentative hand, hovering over the wound on his chest. His eyes snapped open, golden and feral under the firelight, locking onto hers with the intensity that stole her breath. "Touch me not, wanderer," he growled, voice rough as gravel, laced with the authority of one born to rule. Yet there was no rage, only wariness, as if he too sensed the fragile thread between them. Alara withdrew, but not before her fingers brushed his skin, just a graze, feather-light. A jolt passed through her, warm and electric, like moonlight piercing clouds. The Alpha inhaled sharply, his body stilling, the pain in his eyes flickering to something akin to wonder. The pendant glowed faintly, its silver catching the flames, and for a moment the cave seemed less a tomb and more a sanctuary. "Who are you?" he rasped, not rising, but his gaze held her captive, searching the depths of her weary soul. "An outcast," she whispered, the word tasting of ash. "Like you." Outside, the wind mourned anew, carrying the promise of storms yet to break, while inside, two broken souls teetered on the edge of revelation. The moon watched from her fractured throne, silent witness to the first stirrings of a bond forged in blood and frost. The Alpha's golden eyes held Alara's, unblinking in the fire's wavering dance, as if he could pierce the veil of her secrets with a single stare. The cave's shadows clung to his form like loyal hounds, accentuating the ridges of scars that mapped his battles, old and new, etched deeper than flesh. She felt the weight of his gaze, not as conquest, but as a quiet plea, raw and unguarded. The pendant at her throat hummed with that unnatural warmth, a secret pulse syncing with the ragged rhythm of his breath. Outside, the wind clawed at the entrance, hurling snowflakes like accusations. But within these stone walls, time thickened, heavy with unspoken wounds. "I am Thorn," he said at last, his voice a low rumble that stirred the embers. "Once king of the ironclad, now a ghost hunted by my own throne." He shifted slightly, wincing as the movement tugged at the gash on his thigh, fresh blood welling dark against the fur beneath him. Alara's instincts flared, Omega's mercy, unbidden and fierce, urging her to tend him, even as fear coiled in her gut. Kings did not fall without reason. Betrayal's scent lingered on him, sharp as the iron in his armor. She edged closer, ignoring the tremor in her hands, and tore a strip from her shawl. The fabric whispered as it gave way, threads snapping like fragile oaths. "Let me help," she murmured, more to herself than to him, dipping the cloth into a trickle of meltwater from the cave's wall. The liquid was shockingly cold, numbing her fingers, but she pressed it to his chest wound anyway, gentle as snowfall. Thorn tensed, muscles rippling under her touch, yet he did not pull away. Instead, a shiver ran through him. Not from pain, but from the spark that leaped between them, electric and forbidden. As her skin met his, the pendant flared brighter, its crescent glow casting silvery veins across his marred flesh. Alara gasped, pulling back, but it was too late. The air hummed with something ancient, a thread of the goddess weaving through the gloom. The wound beneath her palm knit slowly, edges sealing like frost on a window pane, the blood staunching to a faint scar. Thorn's eyes widened, the feral gold softening to amber wonder. "What sorcery is this?" he whispered, his hand covering hers, holding it there, as if afraid the miracle might vanish. "Not sorcery," Alara replied, her voice barely above the crackle of the fire. "A gift, perhaps, or a curse the pact never saw." She thought of the elders' scorn, their dismissal of her as barren, untouched by the moon's favor. Yet here, in this forsaken hollow. Her touch had awakened something dormant, a healer's light born of exile's despair. The warmth spread from her fingertips into his veins, easing the fever that had gripped him, and for the first time since her banishment, Alara felt seen, not as a shadow, but as a force. Thorn released her hand slowly, his calloused fingers lingering, tracing the pendant's chain with a reverence that made her heart stutter. "The crescent's touch," he breathed, recognition dawning like dawn over the peaks. Legends from his court spoke of omegas marked by the goddess, healers who mended not just body, but the fractured soul of a realm. But those tales were for queens, not wanderers in rags. "You've been hidden from the world, little one. Why?" The question hung between them, laced with the cave's damp chill. Alara withdrew, wrapping her arms around herself, the shawl's absence leaving her exposed. "My pack deemed me worthless. No heat, no bond. They cast me into the wilds to die, under the moon's indifferent eye." The words tasted bitter, like blood on snow, but speaking them aloud loosened the knot in her chest. Thorn's face darkened, shadows deepening the lines of guilt that etched his brow. He was no stranger to rejection's blade. She saw it in the way his gaze drifted to the cave mouth, where the storm raged like an avenging spirit. "I know that blade well," he admitted, propping himself on an elbow, the effort costing him a grimace. "My brother, crown prince by blood, traitor by choice, plotted with rival packs. He struck me down in the throne hall, whispering of my weakness for sparing lives in war. Now his assassins scour these mountains, seeking to end what he began." His voice cracked, not with rage, but sorrow, the weight of a kingdom's fate pressing on his shoulders like the stone above. The fire popped, sending sparks skyward, illuminating the insignia on his pauldron, a snarling wolf entwined with thorns, symbol of the ironclad's unyielding rule. Ilara's empathy stirred, unbidden, a warmth that rivaled the pendant's glow. She should fear him. Alphas like Thorn commanded packs, not compassion, but in his eyes she saw her own exile mirrored, the isolation of the marked, the guilty, the forsaken. "Then we are both prey in this frost," she said softly, adding a log to the fire. Flames leaped higher, casting their faces in golden relief, the heat a fragile barrier against the encroaching night. As the hours deepened, the storm outside intensified, weavos echoing from distant ridges, hunters perhaps, or wild kin drawn by the scent of blood. Thorn's wounds continued to mend under her occasional touches, each one forging a tentative bridge between them. He spoke haltingly of his realm, frozen fortresses where politics wove deadlier webs than any claw, of wars waged for honor that left only ashes. Alara listened, her curiosity blooming amidst the fear, sharing fragments of her pack's rigid hierarchies, the Omega's silenced voices. Laughter did not come, but understanding did, a quiet bond kindled in the hearth's glow. Yet resistance lingered, a shadow in her heart. This Alpha was no savior. He was a storm unto himself, his duty a chain that could drag her deeper into peril. When his hand brushed hers again, seeking the pendant's light for a lingering ache, she hesitated, the touch igniting a pull she dared not name. The moon filtered through a crack in the ceiling, bathing them in pale silver, and Thorn's voice softened. "Stay the night, outcast. The wilds claim the lone wolf." Alara nodded, curling near the fire, the pendant a talisman against the unknown. As sleep tugged at her edges, the wind's howl carried a new note. Pursuers closing in, their howls a chorus of betrayal. In the refuge of this cave, empathy had woven its first threads, but the night whispered of trials yet to come, where protection would demand more than touch. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The storm's fury peaked as midnight clawed at the cave's throat, hurling gusts that rattled loose stones like the bones of forgotten ancestors. Alara lay curled on the edge of the firs, her body a tense coil beside the fire's dying embers, the silver pendant a steady warmth against her skin like a second heartbeat. Sleep evaded her, chased away by the howls that multiplied outside, sharp, coordinated cries that sliced through the wind. No longer the wild's lament, but the hunt of wolves with purpose. Thorn's presence loomed at her side, his breaths deeper now, steadied by her healing touch, yet his hand rested near hers, a silent anchor in the encroaching dark. She turned her head, watching the play of shadows on his face. The high cheekbones softened by exhaustion, the faint scar tracing his jaw like a river of old sorrow. In the quiet hours, he had spoken of his throne's burdens, the endless sieges against shadow clans from the eastern mists, where mercy had cost him allies and nearly his crown. "Strength is not in the blade's swing," he had murmured, eyes distant, "but in the hand that stays it." His words echoed her own hidden fractures, the pack's rejection a mirror to his guilt-ridden exile. Yet doubt gnawed at her. This kingly alpha, with his golden gaze and iron resolve, could shatter her fragile peace as easily as the storm battered the peaks. A sudden crack split the night, ice splintering under heavy paws, and Thorn was upright in an instant, his body a blur of coiled power despite the lingering ache in his limbs. "They've found us!" he growled, low and lethal, snatching his broadsword from the cave floor. The blade gleamed wickedly in the firelight, its edge notched from battles that had forged him. Alara's pulse thundered, fear flooding her veins like icy meltwater. But she rose too, grabbing a jagged rock from the wall, its weight cold and unyielding in her palm. No time for flight. The cave's mouth narrowed to a choke point, a natural bastion if they held it. The first assailant lunged from the blizzard, a beta from Thorn's tails, lean and snarling, eyes burning with the fanatic gleam of the traitor's pack. Clad in ragged furs and iron bracers etched with serpents, he barreled forward, claws extended, the scent of betrayal thick as smoke. Thorn met him mid-stride, sword arcing in a silver crescent that bit deep into furred shoulder, drawing a spray of blood that steamed on the frozen ground. The beta howled, twisting away, but two more followed, shadows detaching from the white void, their forms hulking under cloaks whipped by the gale. Ilara's world narrowed to the chaos, the clash of steel on claw, the wet rip of flesh, the copper tang of blood mingling with the cave's earthy musk. One attacker veered toward her, yellow eyes locking on her slight frame, dismissing her as easy prey. Panic surged, but so did the pendant's heat, a fierce bloom that raced down her arms, igniting her veins with lunar fire. She swung the rock, connecting with his snout in a crunch of bone, but he pressed on, jaws snapping inches from her throat. In desperation, she thrust her free hand forward, palm slamming against his chest fur, not to strike, but to push away the encroaching dark. Light erupted from her touch, silver and searing, like moonlight condensed to a blade. The beta recoiled, yelping as his wounds, from Thorn's earlier skirmishes perhaps, knit shut against his will. Flesh mending in threads of ethereal glow. He staggered back into the snow, confusion twisting his snarl into a whine, before fleeing into the storm, tail low. Ilara stared at her hand, trembling, the pendant pulsing in rhythm with her racing heart. It was no fleeting spark this time. The gift unfurled fully, a cascade of warmth that spread outward, seeking the broken. Thorn dispatched the second foe with a thrust that ended in a gurgle, blood pooling dark on the stone, but the third circled warily, smarter, waiting for an opening. "Behind you," Ilara cried, her voice cutting through the din. As the beta leaped, Thorn spun, but not before claws raked his side, reopening a shallow gash. Pain flared in his roar, yet he pressed the attack, driving the enemy back toward the entrance. Alara moved without thought, her Omega instincts overriding fear, reaching for him as he stumbled. Her fingers found the fresh wound, pressing firm, and again the light bloomed, stronger, insistent, sealing the tear with a whisper of silver mist. Thorn gasped, the agony ebbing to a dull throb, his strength surging back as if the moon herself poured vitality into his blood. The last beta, witnessing the miracle, hesitated, eyes widening in superstitious dread. "The Crescent's bane," he spat, voice laced with fear, before Thorn's sword silenced him forever, the body crumpling into the snow like a discarded shadow. Panting, Thorn turned to her, blood-streaked and fierce. But his gaze held no triumph, only awe, deepening to something profound, like the unveiling of a prophecy long buried. He sheathed his blade, stepping close, the heat of his body cutting through the chill that seeped from the slain. "You are no mere outcast," he said, voice rough with emotion, cupping her face gently, thumb tracing the frost-kissed curve of her cheek. The legend spoke true, the Omega's touch, wielder of the goddess's grace. My court whispered of such a one, a pathfinder to heal the ironclad's rot, but I never believed. Until now. Alara's breath hitched, the weight of his words crashing over her like an avalanche. The pack had branded her barren, a vessel empty of purpose, yet here, in the bloodied refuge of this cave, her gift had awakened fully, binding her to this fallen king's fate. The pendant glowed steadily now, its crescent a beacon in the dim, reflecting in Thorn's eyes as he drew her nearer, their foreheads touching in a moment of shared silence. The storm outside waned to a mournful sigh, but the true tempest brewed within. Her power was no curse, but a key, to his redemption perhaps, or her own entanglement in a war of thrones. Empathy had forged their bond in the heat of battle, protection a vow unspoken, yet doubt lingered like the blood's metallic aftertaste. Could she heal a king without losing herself to his shadows? As dawn's first gray light filtered through the cracks, staining the snow crimson, Thorn pulled away slightly, his hand lingering on hers. "The assassins will return stronger. But with you, the tide may turn." Alara nodded, the fire's embers mirroring the spark in her soul, but her heart whispered of choices yet to come, freedom in exile or destiny's unyielding call. The moon faded, yielding to the pale sun, but her light lingered in the wounds they had mended, a promise of revelations still unfolding. The pale dawn light seeped into the cave like a hesitant intruder, gilding the bloodied snow at the entrance with a deceptive serenity that belied the night's carnage. Alara sat against the rough-hewn wall, her knees drawn to her chest, the silver pendant resting heavy between her breasts, a talisman that now felt less like a relic and more like a living pulse, echoing the thrum of her awakened blood. The air hung thick with the acrid scent of singed fur and cooling iron, the slain beta's forms half buried in drifts just beyond the threshold, their eyes glazed in eternal surprise. Thorn knelt nearby, methodically cleaning his sword with a scrap of cloak, but his movements were deliberate, almost reverent, as if the blade now carried the weight of miracles alongside its notches. Her hands trembled in her lap, not from cold, but from the echo of that silver light that had burst from her touch. It lingered in her veins, a warm undercurrent that chased away the frost's bite, yet it terrified her as much as it thrilled. The pack had always whispered of the goddess's favored, Omegas, whose caresses could knit flesh and soothe the soul's deeper fractures. But those were myths for the worthy, not for one cast out as barren. Alara traced the pendant's crescent with a fingertip, feeling its faint vibration like the distant hum of a hive awakening. What had she unleashed? In healing Thorn, she had glimpsed a power that bound her to him, an invisible chain forged in lunar fire, pulling her from exile's numb embrace into a destiny she had never sought. Thorn sheathed his weapon with a soft click that resonated in the quiet, then turned to her, his golden eyes reflecting the weak sunlight like polished amber. He moved closer, not with the predatory grace of an alpha claiming territory, but with the measured steps of one approaching a sacred flame. Kneeling before her, he took her hands in his, calloused palms enveloping her smaller ones, the contrast stark, his scarred from wars, hers unmarked save for the faint glow that still tingled at her fingertips. "Alara," he said, his voice a low timbre that stirred the embers in the hearth. "You are the revelation I never dared hope for, the crescent's touch. It is no idle legend." She met his gaze, her heart a wild drumbeat against her ribs, the cave's chill forgotten in the heat of his proximity. Up close, the guilt etched into his features was laid bare, lines of sorrow around his eyes, the faint tremor in his jaw that spoke of sleepless nights haunted by throne-room betrayals. "I am no legend," she whispered, pulling her hands back slightly, though the pull between them resisted. "I am broken earth, Thorn. My pack saw nothing in me but emptiness. This light, it frightens me. What if it's a fleeting dream, gone with the next storm?" He shook his head, his breath warm against her skin as he leaned in, refusing to release her fully. No dream, but destiny's hand. In the ironclad scrolls, hidden in the royal vaults, there is prophecy of the Pathfinder, an omega unmarked by heat or bond, yet blessed by the moon to heal the wounded heart of a realm. She mends not just the body, but the spirit's rot, guiding the lost king back to his throne through trials of blood and choice. His fingers tightened around hers, drawing her palm to his chest, where the fresh scar from the knight's claw now lay smooth, a faint silver line like moonlight etched in skin. "Feel it," he urged, pressing her hand there. "Your touch sealed this, but it stirs more. Visions, Thorn. Last night, as the light flowed, I saw fragments, a throne reclaimed, shadows fleeing under a full moon, and you at my side, not as servant, but as equal. The goddess has woven us together." Ilara's breath caught, the pendant flaring hot against her sternum, sending a cascade of warmth through her core. She closed her eyes, and there it was, a whisper in her mind, not words, but sensations. The wind's howl carrying echoes of her pack's distant fires, Thorn's burdens unfolding like a map of frozen rivers and besieged fortresses. Her gift unfurled further, tendrils of empathy reaching into him, tasting the guilt that festered like an open wound. She saw flashes, his brother's blade descending in the throne hall, the screams of a village he had spared only to watch it burn in reprisal, the endless nights of insomnia where pain kept sleep at bay, a king's torment unshared. Tears pricked her eyes as she withdrew, the visions retreating but leaving her shaken, the cave spinning in a haze of silver motes. "You bear it all alone," she murmured, her voice thick with shared sorrow. The air between them charged like the moments before thunder, the wounds that keep you from rest. I feel them now, not just in flesh, but in the soul. How can I be the key to such a fate? I who was rejected, left to the snow's mercy. Thorn's expression softened, the alpha's ferocity yielding to a vulnerability that mirrored her own. A king unmasked, his crown a phantom weight. He cupped her face, thumb brushing away a tear that traced her cheek like frost melting. "Because rejection forged you, as betrayal forged me. The Pathfinder is no pampered queen. She rises from the wilds, her power born of pain. With you, Alara, I could face the ironclad's heart, expose my brother's treason, rally the fractured packs, choose mercy over vengeance. But it demands everything, your freedom for my redemption, your light against the darkness that claims kings." The words hung heavy, a moral crossroads etched in the dawn's glow. Outside, the wind sighed through the peaks, carrying faint uivos that hinted at more hunters stirring in the valleys below. Ilara's heart warred within her, the pull of her gift toward him, a redemptive fire that promised rebirth, clashed with the echo of her exile's freedom, the wild's call to vanish into anonymity. To heal him fully meant delving into his shadows, risking her own unraveling. To walk away left a king to wither, his insomnia a prelude to a realm's fall. The pendant cooled slightly, as if the moon herself pondered the choice, its crescent a silent judge in the growing light. Thorn rose, offering his hand, the cave's shadows retreating as the sun climbed higher, illuminating the path ahead. Treacherous ridges leading toward his distant throne, or deeper wilds where solitude reigned. The revelation binds us, but the choice is yours, he said, his golden eyes holding hers with quiet intensity. Will you walk with the wounded, or let the frost claim us both? Alara hesitated, the weight of destiny pressing like the mountain stone, her soul alight with the possibility of healing what the world had broken. Yet in that pause, doubt bloomed, a spiritual rift, questioning if redemption was worth the surrender of self. The fire's last embers crackled, a fragile oracle as the day unfolded its grim promise. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw your worth. The sun hung low over the Frostfang's jagged spine, casting elongated shadows that clawed across the snow like the fingers of accusing ghosts, as Alara and Thorn crested the final ridge toward the ironclad's borderlands. The air was crisp with the promise of evening frost, carrying the faint, acrid bite of distant smoke, campfires perhaps, or the remnants of a skirmish that had scarred the white expanse below. Alara's boots crunched through the crust of ice, each step a reluctant tether to the path she had chosen, her silver pendant swaying like a pendulum of fate against her chest. Its warmth had not faded since the cave's revelations, but now it pulsed with an urgency that mirrored the storm brewing in her soul, a constant reminder of the power she wielded and the chains it forged. Thorn walked at her side, his stride steady despite the shadows of exhaustion that lingered in his golden eyes that no longer stared into sleepless voids, but forward, toward reckoning. Her touch had eased the deeper wounds, the ones that twisted his nights into torment, knitting not just flesh, but the frayed edges of his spirit. Yet as they descended into the valley, where the frozen river widened into a glassy mirror reflecting the bruised sky, Alara felt the weight of his gaze upon her, heavy with unspoken pleas. He had not pressed her since dawn, but the bond hummed between them, an instinctive pull that warred with her Omega's wariness. Love, she knew, was no gentle bloom in these wilds. It was a blade, demanding sacrifice, and she teetered on its edge, freedom in the endless snows, or entanglement in a king's shadowed throne. The valley floor revealed the first signs of confrontation, tracks in the snow, fresh and deliberate, weaving through clusters of stunted pines like veins of malice. Thorn halted, his hand instinctively reaching for his sword hilt, the metal singing softly as it cleared leather. "My brother's scouts," he murmured, voice laced with the gravel of restrained fury, his breath misting in the chill. "They circle like vultures, waiting for weakness." Alara's heart clenched, the pendant flaring hot, as if sensing the treachery ahead. She had glimpsed his past in her visions, the throne hall's marble slick with blood, his sibling's face twisted in ambition's snarl. But seeing it manifest in the real twisted her gut like a winter knot. They pressed on, the river's edge crunching underfoot, when the ambush erupted from the tree line. Figures detached from the gray trunks, 5 betas, armored in iron plates etched with serpents, their eyes gleaming with the cold zeal of the usurper's guard. At their forefront loomed a rival alpha, broader than Thorn, his furred cloak billowing like a banner of conquest, scars crisscrossing his muzzle in brutal testimony to won battles. "Brother's blade!" the rival snarled, his voice a thunderous bark that echoed off the peaks. "Or does the fallen king cower behind an Omega's skirts?" Laughter rippled through his pack, sharp as breaking ice, but Thorn stepped forward, shielding Alara with his bulk, his presence a wall of unyielding steel. The clash began in a blur of motion, swords clanging like the tolling of doom bells, the air filling with the metallic tang of blood and the guttural snarls of exertion. Thorn met the rival head-on, their blades locking in a shower of sparks that lit the snow like falling stars, muscles straining in a dance of old grievances. Alara backed against a boulder, her pulse roaring in her ears, the pendant's heat surging as one beta broke from the fray, lunging toward her with claws extended, yellow eyes fixed on her throat. Fear iced her veins, but instinct flared. She dodged, her hand whipping out to seize his arm mid-swing. Silver light erupted from her palm, searing into his flesh, not to wound but to bind, the gash on his shoulder from Thorn's glancing blow sealing shut, forcing a yelp of confusion from his maw. He recoiled, pawing at the mended skin, hatred warring with bewilderment in his gaze. Across the melee, Thorn parried a vicious thrust from the rival, driving him back with a roar that shook the pines, but the alpha countered with a swipe that gashed Thorn's forearm, blood blooming dark against his bracer. Pain flashed in his eyes, a momentary falter, and Alara moved without thought, weaving through the chaos to reach him. Her fingers pressed to the wound, the light flowing like moonlight on water, knitting the tear even as the rival's pack closed in. "Stay back!" Thorn bellowed to her, but his voice cracked with the relief of healing, his free hand gripping hers briefly, a spark of connection amid the fury. The rival alpha paused, sniffing the air thick with the scent of lunar magic, his snarl twisting into a leer. "The Crescent's whore," he spat, circling with predatory grace. Brother warned of such sorcery, and Omega's trick to soften the throne. But blood demands blood, Thorn. Your mercy has rotted the ironclad. Join us, or die with your pet. The words struck like venom, dredging Thorn's guilt to the surface. Visions of spared villages turned to ash, the weight of lives lost to his compassion. He hesitated, sword lowering a fraction, the moral chasm yawning before him. Forgiveness for a brother's treason, a chance to reclaim the realm without further slaughter, or war's unyielding path, stained by vengeance. Alara felt it all through their bond, the pendant channeling his turmoil into her own heart, a torrent of doubt that mirrored her exile's scars. Her pack's elders had rejected her for weakness, branding her unfit, yet here she stood, her gift a bridge between destruction and redemption. As another beta charged, she intercepted, her touch disarming him with forced healing, sending him sprawling in dazed retreat. But the rival lunged at Thorn, blade aimed true, and Alara cried out, shoving forward to shield him. The steel grazed her shoulder, a shallow burn that drew her blood, hot and real, splattering the snow in crimson petals. Pain lanced through her, but so did clarity. The choice crystallized in that moment of shared wound. Thorn whirled, dispatching the rival with a final mercy-tinged strike, not to kill, but to maim, sparing the life that echoed his brother's folly. The remaining betas fled into the gathering dusk, howls fading like defeated echoes, leaving the valley silent save for the river's murmur and their ragged breaths. Thorn dropped to his knees beside her, his hands gentle as he examined the cut, the pendant glowing as he pressed his palm over it, drawing on her own light in reverse, a tentative exchange that blurred their boundaries. "Why?" he rasped, golden eyes searching hers, raw with the storm of what might have been. "You could have run, claimed your freedom in the wilds. This war, it devours all." Alara met his gaze, the pain in her shoulder fading under his touch, but the deeper ache lingered, the ethical precipice of love's demand. Forgiveness meant binding herself to his throne, healing a realm's fractures at the cost of her solitude. War promised her escape, but left a king to his insomnia's abyss, his wounds unhealed. The blood on the snow steamed faintly, a symbol of choices etched in red, as the moon began her ascent, silvering the peaks. "Because strength is choosing mercy," she whispered, echoing his own philosophy, her voice trembling with the weight of revelation turned trial. "But what of my freedom, Thorn? To heal you is to lose myself, or is redemption our shared rebirth?" He pulled her close, the warmth of his body a bulwark against the encroaching cold. Yet the question hung between them, a spiritual rift widening under the lunar gaze. The pendant pulsed, insistent, as distant Weavos stirred anew, the pack, the traitor, drawing nearer. In this bloodied valley, judgment loomed not as verdict, but as the forge of souls, where love and liberty clashed like swords in the frost. The moon crested the Frostfang's silhouette like a crown of fractured silver, her light spilling over the valley in a pale cascade that turned the bloodied snow to shimmering rubies. Elara leaned into Thorn's embrace, the shallow gash on her shoulder a throbbing echo of the choice that now clawed at her core, its warmth seeping through the torn fabric of her shift like a lover's reluctant kiss. The pendant against her chest burned with insistent fervor, channeling not just her gift, but the raw pulse of his turmoil, the guilt that had chained him to sleepless nights, the ethical precipice where mercy and vengeance blurred into one unforgiving blade. His arms encircled her, solid as ancient oaks rooted in frost, yet trembling with the vulnerability of a king unthroned, his breath ragged against her temple, carrying the faint salt of unshed tears mingled with the metallic tang of battle's aftermath. The valley lay hushed, the rival's fallen form a dark stain amid the retreating shadows of his pack, their howls dissolving into the wind's mournful dirge. Distant Weavos rose from the eastern ridges, Thorn's brother, the traitor, closing the noose with the ironclad's fractured legions, drawn by the scent of spilled blood and lunar defiance. Elara's senses sharpened under the moon's gaze, the air alive with the crisp bite of pine resin and the earthy musk of churned soil beneath the ice. Every inhalation, a reminder of the world's unyielding indifference. She had chosen to shield him, her touch a bridge across the abyss. But now the cost unfurled in her soul. To heal this alpha was to surrender the wild's solitary whisper, the freedom of an outcast unbound by thrones or bonds. Yet in his golden eyes, reflected moonlight danced with a depth that mirrored her own rebirth, from barren shadow to the goddess's veiled instrument. Thorn pulled back slightly, his hands framing her face, thumbs tracing the frost-dusted curve of her jaw with a tenderness that belied his warrior's scars. The wound on her shoulder knit slowly under his lingering palm, her light flowing in reverse, a mutual exchange that blurred the lines between healer and healed, Omega and King. "Elara," he murmured, voice a gravelly hymn laced with the melancholy of duties long borne alone, "your mercy in the fray. It spared more than my flesh. It showed me the path I feared, not the blade's cold justice, but forgiveness forged in fire." His gaze dropped to the pendant, its crescent glowing like a captured star, illuminating the faint silver veins that now traced his skin where her touches had mended him. No longer did insomnia's shadows haunt his features. Sleep's promise lingered in the softening of his brow, a quiet victory born of her grace. Yet guilt etched deeper lines around his eyes, the lives his compassion had failed to save. The brother's betrayal, that echoed his own past leniencies, turned to ash. She placed her hand over his, feeling the steady thrum of his heart beneath the armor's chill steel, a rhythm that synced with her own, pulling her inexorably into the vortex of their shared fate. The moon watched, impartial arbiter, her beams weaving through the pines like threads of destiny, stirring visions in Elara's mind. A throne hall bathed in dawn's gold, packs united under a banner of thorns and crescents, Thorn's reign renewed not by conquest, but by the quiet strength of chosen mercy. But threaded through it all was sacrifice, her exile's freedom traded for the realm's healing, her light poured into wounds that might never fully close, binding her to a love that demanded everything. "And if I choose the wilds?" she whispered, her voice fracturing like thin ice underfoot, the wind tugging at her hair as if urging flight. To vanish into the snow, leaving your shadows to the moon alone? Is redemption worth the unraveling of my soul? Thorn's expression fractured, the ethical weight of her words pressing like the mountain's unyielding stone, his breath hitching in the silence that followed. Blood from her wound, now staunched, dripped onto the snow between them, steaming faintly, a symbolic offering to the earth that had claimed so many broken souls. He rose slowly, drawing her with him, their forms silhouetted against the lunar glow, two figures forged in frost and fire. "It would heal me," he admitted, raw honesty stripping the king to the man beneath, "but doom the ironclad to my brother's iron fist. Mercy without you is a hollow echo, Ilara, a king's insomnia unbroken, his choices forever stained by isolation." His hand cupped the pendant, fingers brushing her skin in a touch that ignited sparks of warmth, chasing the valley's encroaching cold. The air hummed with spiritual resonance, the goddess's presence a subtle vibration in the earth, urging union over despair. Ilara closed her eyes, the pendant's heat blooming into a cascade that flooded her veins, illuminating the depths of her heart. Rejection had been her forge, exile her crucible. Now, in this blood-kissed valley, Renascimento beckoned, not as loss, but as transcendence. She stepped closer, her forehead resting against his, the scent of him, steel, smoke, and the faint, wild bloom of healing enveloping her like a mantle. "Then we choose together," she breathed, the words a vow etched in moonlight, her hands sliding to his chest where old scars lay dormant. Silver light unfurled from her palms, deeper this time, delving into the soul's hidden fractures. The guilt of spared villages raised, the betrayal's sting, the endless nights of unrest. Thorn shuddered, a low groan escaping him as peace seeped in, knitting the invisible wounds that had kept sleep at bay, his body yielding to the embrace of rest long denied. He drew her into his arms fully, their union a quiet cataclysm, the Alpha's melancholy yielding to redemptive fire, the Omega's broken earth blooming under lunar grace. The distant howls crested, the traitor's forces cresting the ridge like a tide of shadows, but Thorn faced them now, with eyes clear, unburdened, his sword hand steady beside her healing touch. Sacrifice had woven them inseparable, her freedom for his cure, his throne for their shared rebirth. Blood on the snow melted under the moon's warmth, a testament to choices made, as they turned toward the fray, not as lone warriors, but as one soul reforged, destiny's flame kindled anew in the heart of winter. The wind sighed approval, carrying their bond across the peaks, where redemption's light pierced the eternal frost. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.